Hello, everyone. It looks like we've gotten some people to pop in. Thanks for coming and joining us today. We can get started right away. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Geographic Society of Chicago's February Travelogue. I'm Natalie. I'm with the GSC office, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. If this is your first time attending a GSC event, welcome and thank you for tuning in. Today's presentation is John Kokoris, who will be presenting on Route 66 and the road's 100th anniversary. John is a lifelong Illinois enthusiast. He grew up camping in northern Illinois, went to school downstate, and travels across the state with his family whenever he can. He works in a Chicagoland library by day, and in the evenings, his mission is to spread his love for the land of Lincoln far and wide, including at libraries across the region and on the airwaves of the state's NPR affiliates. Before we begin, for those who have questions during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and when we'll get to them at the very end of the presentation. John, thanks for again for being here with us today and presenting, and let the travelogue begin.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Natalie, and everyone who's taken some time out of their busy day to talk about Route 66 with me. We're covering just the first leg of what's a really long journey from Chicago to St. Louis. I've kind of billed myself as Mr. Illinois, so I tend to not venture too far beyond our border. But let me tell you, I've spent a lot of time along the Route 66 corridor in our state, and I'm really happy that this is the 100th anniversary of the famous highway, which means maybe for once more people will be interested in listening to me talk about my travels. But I know everyone here, I won't have that problem with. You guys are fellow geography nerds and travelers, and I've packed this talk with a lot of good stuff for you. Old maps, historic postcards, and photos from my more recent travels. So, just really quickly about me, you heard a great little bio there. I won't belabor the point, but I kind of got into this little uh, Illinois lecturing because, well, after a lifetime traveling the state, it really started to grate on me how many people I know, especially up around Chicago where I live, kind of rag on Illinois as being flat and boring and ugly and nothing but cornfields. And while it is true, our itinerary today will take us past a lot of corn. There's so much more to our state. So I've become kind of a traveling preacher in a way, proclaiming the good news of Illinois travel. And this is a great time to do this. I will be fully honest with especially any like diehard Route 66 lovers in the audience today. I am a bit of a Johnny come lately to this particular niche of Illinois travel. I've been in all of these cities so many times over the last couple decades, but the actual like mid-century Americana surrounding this highway, it didn't initially appeal to me that much. So while I spent tons of time in Springfield and Bloomington, here I am pictured at the Vrooman Mansion in Bloomington. I was more interested in Abraham Lincoln, Victorian stuff, Native American stuff. But when I saw this anniversary was coming up this year, I thought, all right, it's time to buckle down and get serious about the highway itself. So I've come to really love and appreciate it greatly in the course of kind of putting this lecture together. So before we get any further, what is Route 66? First of all, is it Route 66? Is it Route 66? They're both fine to say. Route 66 is kind of more popular because of the song, but you can call it either thing. But it's a highway that officially was commissioned in 1926, 100 years ago this November, going from Chicago to LA, about 2,400 miles across 8 states. Kansas barely counts there. They got about 12 or 13 miles in the corner if you're looking at that map. Its glory days were kind of the 40s and 50s, before it started to decline due to the interstate highway kind of superseding it. Um, and eventually it was so redundant to the interstate that it was decommissioned in 1985. So it is not an official U.S. highway anymore. So why are we still talking about it? Why is it probably the most famous highway in America and probably one of the most famous roads in the world? I'd be curious after this if anyone can like name some more famous roads. Um, a big part of why it kind of had this impact, well, there's a few reasons: timing, geography, and marketing. Um, we'll start with kind of the timing of when this route was commissioned and when auto travel was really starting to boom in the late 1920s. The center of population for the country was shifting in a southwesterly direction. If you're looking at the mean and median center of population in the state, for this metric pictured here, right around 1920, it's crossing into the state of Illinois. So it's a big part of it. The biggest, fastest growing city in America in the 1890s was Chicago. You can look at the crowds at the World's Fair. In the 1900s, late 1900s, early 1910s, Oklahoma City was the fastest growing uh, city in the country. Pictured here is its newly built Capitol, with working oil derricks on the Capitol grounds. If that gives you a clue as to why population was booming there then. And then in the 1920s, LA was the fastest growing city in the country. So the timing really like parallels kind of growth in the United States and where people were headed. In terms of like why you would want to drive down this highway instead of others, well, one of the other most famous kind of transcontinental highways is the Lincoln Highway. Not to knock on the great state of Nebraska, but you hear a lot of complaints about people who drive out west to California that for a pretty long time there isn't much variation in the landscape. And of course, for much of the year, especially back then, before we had kind of perfected salting and plowing, and even paving for that matter, these roads were nearly impassable for much of the year. So Route 66 headed in a different direction, and it was just much more exotic, much sexier. Not only did it kind of take people in the direction they kind of wanted to go anyways, but it did it in a way that felt fun and different. And in fact, many of the states that it travels through, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, were actually new states right around 1910. So this was really just like kind of an exciting time to go to this part of the country. There are also just kind of master marketers behind this highway. And now that wasn't unique to Route 66. Many of the kind of big highways tried their best to attract tourists and attract commerce to their corridor. But there's something about the people behind Route 66. They were almost kind of manic about the way they were promoting this. It's the best, it's the shortest, it's the fastest. Year round, it's good. And I think part of the reason was a lot of this boosterism came from Oklahoma, which again was kind of just coming off of a huge boom and kind of was otherwise bypassed by the national highways. And this is just speculation, but there's almost like a certain desperation to their promotion of Route 66 that I think really kind of inspired all the other businesses along the road in other states and just kind of propelled it forward. One of their earliest stunts was a international transcontinental foot race in 1928. These runners began in Los Angeles and they ended up running to New York, but they did all of Route 66 through Chicago before kind of cutting over and continuing on to New York. So it's stunts like these that really captured people's attention early on. And those continued throughout the kind of the golden age of Route 66. When Oklahoman Will Rogers died, they immediately named the highway after him in his honor, and they went on several tours promoting different kind of movies about him, and just constantly drumming up interest in Route 66. Obviously, Hollywood and kind of the magic of LA was just kind of becoming a new concept to America and catching people's attention. Um, Yes, in the early days of Route 66, that Hollywood sign actually said Hollywood Land, which is kind of surprising to me. Here's the beach in Santa Monica where the road now ends. And just some of the like incredible architecture coming up in LA. And of course, MGM, some of those early Hollywood studios just doing amazing things and then beaming that to small towns across the country. So that had a lot to do with the allure of Route 66 to its first travelers. And even like on the agricultural side of things, we'll talk about kind of the most famous example of this, but these stories of growing lemons and oranges and growing crops kind of like year round in these fertile valleys of California were very appealing to the farmers of America, especially during the Dust Bowl. And of course, it was John Steinbeck who coined the term the Mother Road to describe Route 66. And it's Route 66 that the Joads, the fictional Joad family, and many real families traveled to kind of leave their lives on the Great Plains and head west to the promised land of California. Actually, the famous Grapes of Wrath parallels very closely the work of a Farm Bureau worker named Sonora Babb. She was working these kind of migrant farmer camps for the federal government when Steinbeck was assigned by a newspaper to kind of report on what was happening with all these poor Okies showing up in California. And Bab was actually the one kind of interviewing everyone and taking notes on their stories. And she started to work this book. And Steinbeck was given her notes by the migrant camp administrator. And I don't think anyone, as far as I can tell, no one really accuses him of like plagiarizing or stealing from her. But this is really the basis of the Grapes of Wrath book. And her own novel never even got published because Grapes of Wrath was so popular and it came out first. And it wasn't until like 2004 when this author was reaching the end of her life that the book finally got published. And it's a fascinating read if you like Grapes of Wrath. And just kind of one, I like to give a lot of book recommendations in my lectures. Just kind of one kind of archetypical LA noir novel, maybe the most famous and beloved, The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. But there's a lot of kind of good pulp fiction kind of coming out of California at this time, as well as movies, of course. On the song Get Your Kicks on Route 66 kind of continued the work of Hollywood in promoting this highway in particular over all others. It was written while the songwriter Bobby Troop was driving Route 66. No surprise there. And it quickly became a hit when Nat King Cole recorded it. Many others, of course, have recorded and performed it. Chuck Berry, the Rolling Stones, John Mayer, Bob Dylan, kind of a lot of the greats from every age took a liking to this song and everything that they thought it stood for. There's also an odd show in the early 60s called Route 66. And it was about two guys kind of traveling rural highways and encountering people and helping it would solve their problems, or sometimes they weren't even really the focus of the episode. But it just kind of showcased small town mid-century America. Oddly enough, very little of it actually was filmed on Route 66 or took place on Route 66. One of the reasons for that was the complexities of filming on such a busy and kind of traffic choked roadway. They just couldn't get camera crews down there and shut down the roads. So ironically, the show doesn't really have that much to do with Route 66, but by 1960, that the name of that highway kind of embodied so much about like small town America and country highways that they could just name the show that to get the message across better than any other way. So I've kind of like hinted at this, but then if we were all in person, I would poll the audience now to ask kind of what themes come to mind when they think of Route 66 today. But I'll just kind of tell you the ones that I think of. Nostalgia is a big part of it, and to me, this was initially kind of like one of the main turnoffs for me to really like getting into Route 66. I thought there was something just kind of sad, like. And don't get me wrong, I live in the past. I go to tons of museums and read almost exclusively history books. But there's something sort of like sad about clinging to the past in a certain way, like pining for a town's glory days, without too much like innovation and looking forward at the same time. And that really like turned me off for a little while. But when I kind of like, I went on a couple little mini tours of some of these kind of nostalgic diners and things that I had maybe skipped on earlier adventures. And I came to appreciate it too. And really talking to other people who love Route 66 and meeting people on the road, talking to them, I think some of the like sadness about what was lost or maybe what we never quite even had is part of the appeal. It's not just like a simple-minded going back to the good old days. It's kind of like thinking about this dream in the 1940s and 50s, that post-war boom, like where people thought we were headed and what that would have felt like. And even if it never was really true or never lasted, like thinking about the difference between then and now and how we got to where we are now is it's a very real part of the appeal for Route 66 to people. So I was a little uncharitable initially when I thought everyone was kind of like pathetic, just like living in the past in this particular way. Another major theme is transportation infrastructure and urban planning. Driving, especially in Illinois, where there had already been a lot of transportation infrastructure prior to Route 66. It's a really cool way to see how things have evolved and continued, and these little bits of the earlier roads that have been left behind and preserved, like these original pavers in Joliet that you can see. And then also just finally the last theme, kind of the birth of modern America and like changing from, for to put it simply, the olden days to now. Um, Driving this highway really encapsulates that. You see things like the first drive-through in the world was this Made Right stand in Springfield. Here's a great picture of the Gateway Arch being constructed. It was this kind of like time where people were dreaming big and literally traveling to the moon. Route 66 really kind of it epitomizes that spirit as you drive it. But it's not all good. Of course, some of that urban planning was very destructive. Here they are pulling out the amazing electric interurban like streetcar train system that covered most of Illinois, just to make way for more roads. Of course, race looms large anytime you talk about history in America. But really, during this period of the 20s through, the 60s, when Route 66 was big, was this pivotal moment for African Americans. And you see that as you're driving down the road as well. Tons of bits of that legacy. So let's just talk about the history specifically now. Um, it's not like Route 66 was one concept prior to 1926. It was really kind of stitched together from pre-existing roads. Those roads were generally kind of upgraded Native American trails, and those Native American trails, many of them, the long distance ones especially, trace back to early buffalo traces. And on Route 66, you'll pass Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie, where there's a large herd of bison that have been kind of rewilded into this huge, kind of restored prairie just south of Joliet. And it was bison like these who kind of were following their food and finding over hundreds and thousands of years, finding kind of high ground that was less likely to get muddy and going that way seasonally every year for so long. They were able to kind of trod paths in the prairie and around the swamps. And of course, Native Americans who were hunting them would then follow those paths and further kind of entrench them into the geography. And that's kind of the story of Route 66, especially in Illinois. It follows a lot of these early bison traces and Native American trails. Here's a map going up from the St. Louis area to Springfield that very closely parallels Route 66. It's kind of eerie to see. I think this map is from 1823. And it was the railroad that kind of originally followed this route, mostly kind of taking the shortest line between Chicago and St. Louis, the St. Louis area, but making some small deviations in order to hit some of the big population centers and again, kind of like follow that high ground, that smooth, level terrain. And it was the Chicago and Alton Railroad that kind of dominated this corridor for several decades. Here's a map. You see it goes from Chicago through Joliet, Braidwood, Dwight, Bloomington, Springfield. Kind of deviates from Route 66 when on the approach to St. Louis because it was hidden up Alton first, which was a booming industrial river city at the time. But very closely parallels Route 66 today. And in fact, you're driving along that railroad, within feet of it for most of this drive. Then when autos enter the scene at the turn of the century, it's a really kind of confusing mess. Local kind of communities got together and tried to kind of chart out good roads that connected from place to place. They had these symbols that they would kind of band around like telephone poles and trees even that had different like colors and letters on them to signify like follow this way to go a certain way. And if you were an early automobiler, you would just kind of know, okay, I'm going from Chicago. I'm trying to get to Dubuque. I'm going to follow this CD trail icon. Um, but obviously, that's not the most reliable way to navigate. And furthermore, there was really no quality control. Any enterprising communities anywhere could just kind of come up with their own auto trail and say it was a thing. That didn't mean that it was safe. That didn't mean it was in good repair. And in many cases, it might just kind of peter out short of where it said it was going. This was the state of the highway system, if you could call it that, the auto trail system during this time in the early 1900s and 19 teens. And a lot of automobilers teamed up with what was called the Good Roads movement, which was started by bicyclists in the late 1800s to advocate for government spending on highways. And at the time, that was controversial. In fact, many states in their state constitution forbade the state government from financing road building, which I don't really understand why they would do that, but it was a mess. Route 66 very closely follows what was then called the Pontiac Trail. This was the kind of official insignia. You would be looking for signs that had this kind of imagery on it, and you would be following it. And like I said, that became kind of a part of the Good Roads movement. And very quickly, the state of Illinois got on board. They passed like a state bond bill to fund the construction of certain important highways. And that's what happened. And they ended up doing, here's a map from before the state got involved. You can see all these like words labeling these auto trails. There's arrows everywhere. You can see, like, if you look closely, you'll see these little boxes that say white, black, white, red, white. There's one with a diamond in it. It's telling you like what signs to look for. Road maps at the time, or not maps, I guess, like early kind of traveler's guides would just say like turn at the big tree, drive past four houses and turn on the gravel road, turn right. That was wayfinding back then. So after the state got involved, this is the same area, kind of cleaned up with numbers. That was their big innovation there, and it was State Bond Highway 4. That's what the Pontiac Trail became. And pretty soon, the federal government got involved. I think it was 1921. They passed a kind of robust Federal Highway Act that sought to kind of replicate what states were doing nationwide. They were designating the most important states and making it so that you could go between states without getting too confused. And the numbering system they devised started in the Northeast up in Maine. You see that US 1. North-south routes were given odd numbers, and east-west routes were given even numbers. And the idea was that the major routes would end in 0 or 1, those kind of major transcontinental highways. Don't get confused because when they did the interstate map, 30 years later, they actually purposely did it in the opposite way, so that the roads wouldn't be too confusing. But this is how the U.S. highway system is numbered. So we'll view this figure who's kind of considered the father of Route 66, Cyrus Avery. He's from Oklahoma, or he's based in Oklahoma and in Tulsa, and he's watching this conversation um, growing nationally about major U.S. highways, and he's starting to fret that Oklahoma is going to be left behind. So he and another man from Missouri, from Springfield, Missouri, named John Woodruff, and got together and with other prominent people from kind of that middle of the country and started scheming to get a major road passing through Springfield, Missouri, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they were kind Avery was appointed to a federal body that was kind of consulting on this matter in creating these routes. And he was advocating for US Highway 60, again, one of those major routes ending in 0, east-west routes to go from Chicago to LA, conveniently passing right past some like properties he owned and community he loved. And that was going swimmingly until the state of Kentucky obviously had some of their own schemers, and they realized we don't have a single major U.S. highway going through the state of Kentucky. That will not do at all. Um, they they were lobbying for US 60 to come through Kentucky and bypass the communities that Avery cared about. So there was a lot of fighting, and it looked for a moment like Kentucky was going to win. Avery and Woodruff struck up this compromise saying, okay, Kentucky, we'll give you Highway 60. Um, and we'll take another number, but we want to kind of have that same number going between LA, Chicago, and all of us in Oklahoma and Missouri. We want a consistent number. So what happens is now US 60 does go through Kentucky, but it kind of peters out when it runs into US 66. And what Avery wanted was that consistency so that travelers from LA and Chicago kind of were staying on this one road. They could rely on this particular highway. And Avery and Woodruff settled on 66 as their compromise number. They were offered 62, which maybe was more prestigious, being lower, but they thought 66 kind of rolled off the tongue. So that's why they picked it, because right from the get-go, they were looking at how to market this road and get people to pay attention to it. improvements started right away. 66, as it was designated, just kind of like compiled a bunch of pre-existing roads, but many of them were quite muddy, quite treacherous. This is not actually on 66, but it passes nearby in Texas. Um, or Arizona, but this was taken in 1940, this picture. So that's how bad roads were in America at this time. This is how roads were improved. Something called the drag. I think the King's drag was the name of this particular patent. And you just tie some like flattened logs to the back of your horse and smooth out the mud. That was considered road improvement back then. But during this kind of good roads movement and the establishment of the U.S. highway system, people started to make improvements. This is a restored section of brick road on old Route 66. Um, the route was not like fully paved in brick. Just sections of it were, particularly around towns. But it's a popular spot to check out near Auburn. But the improvements kept coming. Here we're looking at the construction of bypasses in Bloomington, what's now called Veterans Parkway, in the late 30s, early 40s. It's just kind of amazing to me. We went from like mud that had like these rudimentary road signs tied to trees to this sort of infrastructure so quickly in like less than 20 years. And really, the success of Route 66 directly led to its failure because during the 40s, we were building these bypasses around towns. And then during the 50s and 60s and 70s, we just kept getting bigger and more kind of advanced with our engineering and ended up building an interstate right next to Route 66 that totally kind of defeated the need for these for Route 66 and many U.S. highways. So I-55 ended up kind of superseding Route 66 in Illinois, and then I-44 and I-40 kind of took it the rest of the way. So this is a picture taken in Chicago, I think in 1977. Illinois kind of decommissioned Route 66 earlier than the country overall and just directed all traffic onto I-55. And now kind of like one of the ramifications is the disappearance of some of these towns that didn't get interstate interchanges. Cars couldn't get on and off the new road in these towns, and they essentially disappear. This town of Cayuga was never that big, but it is virtually empty now, and it's kind of a landmark in the early stretch of Route 66. A couple books to jot down. If you're interested in kind of the story of road engineering, a couple good ones here. This is a very kind of critical take, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, looking at how these big highway projects really are kind of destroying communities, especially smaller towns and smaller cities. And in the late 80s, right after the route was decommissioned, in early 90s, there was this renaissance, this kind of realization people had of what we lost or what we kind of screwed up, or just kind of the unintended consequences of progress. Michael Wallace wrote this book called The Mother Road, Route 66, The Mother Road that is kind of credited for kicking out off this sudden resurgence in interest and a realization like, hold on, there's stuff out on this old road that we need to preserve. And about 15 years later, the Pixar movie Cars came out and introduced Route 66 and many of these themes to kind of the next generation, people who maybe didn't grow up vacationing on this highway, and kind of clued them in on its significance. So let's just start rolling here. This is right now the official starting point of Route 66. It's in between or on Jackson in Michigan or Adams and Michigan. They're both one-way streets. So depending on the direction of travel, your starting point may be different. But just picture the Art Institute. But don't get too comfortable picturing the Art Institute because just last week it was announced Chicago is moving, or Illinois is moving the official starting point to Navy Pier, a few blocks to the north, which is kind of funny to me. Like, how do you move the official starting point of a defunct highway that doesn't exist anymore? A little too late for that. But it makes sense to me, especially because the unofficial end of the route is on the Santa Monica Pier. So it's a peer-to-peer system now. I support that. And, let's be honest, a lot of tourists coming to Chicago, and where better to send them than Navy Pier. Great guidebook I love bringing with me as I explore this area is the WPA Guide to Illinois by the writers of the Federal Writers Project. This was a New Deal program to get unemployed writers to work. And they sent these people, and some of them kind of became successful professional writers and authors later in their careers. They were just unemployed youngsters at the time. And they just crisscrossed the state on all these new highways in the 1930s and wrote this wonderful guidebook. So they have not updated it since 1939. So it's not exactly, I wouldn't plan your specific navigation around it, but it's really interesting to kind of read a guidebook um, from Route 66's heyday. And it covers more than just 66, but has quite a bit on that highway, which was the most traveled highway in Illinois for much of its existence. Kind of the unofficial starting meal on Route 66 is Lou Mitchell's. Lou Mitchell's. It's a 100-year-old restaurant. And here's my daughter enjoying a free donut hole there. They also give ladies a free milk dud at Lou Mitchell's. I'm not exactly sure why, and I'm jealous not having gotten one. But it's a really cute, old-timey, classic diner. The food's good, nothing really unusual there. You're going to see a lot of familiar menus as you travel Route 66. A lot of diner fare. But th this place does it really well. A couple of key spots on the way. I mentioned the Art Institute, of course, the Willis Tower, Old St. Pat's, the oldest public building in Chicago, also on the route. So a couple of places to pop in if you have the time. But of course, if you're a Chicagoan or a Chicagoland resident, you could be forgiven for kind of breezing through the first few dozen miles of this road because you can kind of check these places out anytime. The West Side, though, you might not have as much reason to find yourself in. So I'll highlight just a few things. Beautiful Douglas Park is part of Chicago's kind of old boulevard system and those grand old parks. The neighborhoods that it surrounds, Douglas Park, North and South Lawndale, they've kind of like suffered from some disinvestment really kind of stemming from like white flight and segregation and racial unrest, really racism, in the mid-century. So when Route 66 started, this was kind of an up-and-coming uh, series of neighborhoods, various ethnicities. And you'll see like old synagogues in this sort of area, like really cool places that like the demographics have changed quite a bit since then. So it's just kind of interesting to compare and contrast. Like Little Village, also a very predominantly Hispanic neighborhood back in the early days of Route 66. That would have been like a bohemian neighborhood. My Czech ancestors lived there. So tons of change, but it's really fascinating if you like history when you travel to see like okay, what's here now and what's succeeding here now? What's the community like and what are the like kind of lasting physical relics that you can see in the geography and in the built environment from that earlier time. So it's an interesting place to poke around. Cicero, this is a Cindy Lynn Motel. This is the last motel on Route 66 before you reach Chicago. Still stands. This has nothing to do with Route 66, but I just love that there's a private eye across the street from this seedy motel. You got to imagine that guy has some crazy stories to tell. This private investigator. Continue on through Berwyn. This is the last kind of continuously operating auto repair place on Ogden. which forms a big chunk of Route 66 in Chicagoland. This was kind of like Auto Alley for Chicago for a long time. Tons of dealerships and repair shops. Many of them still there, but just not operating under the same name. You see this one has a sign in the window, 104 years old. So pretty impressive. Um, Berwyn has a lot of great mid-century and kind of auto culture nostalgia. I actually live here. These sites, well, the car spindle is sadly gone. It was taken down about a decade ago. And these other pictures aren't right on Route 66, but elsewhere in Berwyn. But it's a cool town to explore if you just like that kind of aesthetic. Right when Route 66 turns onto Harlem, if you just stay on Ogden for an extra mile, you'll pass this very well preserved scene from this kind of heyday of automobiling. This castle was made in Lyons purely to attract tourists to come and picnic in Lyons. There's a little forest reserve across the street with like an old split rail fence, and it's just and the bridge over the Des Plaines River is a very cool vintage 1930s WPA era bridge. So it gives you that aesthetic of the early days of Route 66. Chicago Portage is about a mile off the route, but just a key kind of preserves a key moment in Chicago and Illinois history. This is where Marquette and Joliet kind of took their shortcut from the Mississippi River watershed up the Illinois and Des Plaines, and then they got out of their canoes and dragged them a couple miles to get into the Chicago River and the Lake Michigan watershed. And that incident, that episode that they were shown this shortcut by Native Americans, that is why Chicago is where it is. It's why Chicago is one of the biggest cities in the country. And it's no coincidence to me that this key spot is right off of Route 66 because this is a corridor of travel that is as old. It's really much older than our state itself. Henry's is a kind of classic hot dog joint in Cicero. This place is newer, cigars and stripes, but it really leans into the Route 66 culture. I can't say I love the food at either of these places, but I appreciate the aesthetic. McCook, this is a stretch of road that has been inoperable for more than 20 years. It goes over the giant quarry in McCook and Hodgkins. And there's a kind of a dispute. Damage caused by all this quarrying made the road unsafe, and the quarry and the state couldn't come to an agreement about who had to pay to fix it. So they just closed it, and it's a very long stretch of road that you can no longer drive. There's a very clearly marked detour. Um, Another attraction in McCook that we probably will never live to see is, I think, the lowest effort um, attempt to build a Bears stadium. This was their proposal to just stick it next to the quarry. This just came out. I don't know. I can't imagine why no one's talking about it. I'll just leave it at that. Couple great chicken restaurants as you leave Chicagoland, Del Rey and White Fence Farm. And then we approach Joliet. It gets confusing. I'm not going to get into this level of detail for every city, but just know that over the decades, the routing of Route 66 changed many times. And since it's not a real route anymore, it's kind of poorly signed. It gets very confusing when you approach any city where you're supposed to be driving. Most people kind of head down 53 now, and that's where some of the most iconic sites in the Joliet area are. It takes you right through the heart of the beautiful downtown. But the oldest routing goes down, kind of paralleling the canal. Now it's called 171. Takes you through Lamont and Lockport and past the old Joliet prison. The Plainfield alignment was the alignment used for the longest, but people don't talk about it as much and doesn't have quite as much as many attractions. You'll pass Stateville Prison. On the other side of the river is Old Joliet Prison, which they give fantastic tours. Really just a crazy, crazy place with lots of kind of horrific stories. But the Historical Society there does just an amazing job kind of telling that story and its implications right up to present day. A lot of these little soft serve stands along Route 66, I recommend against stopping at all of them. I actually did. I did like a couple speed runs of Route 66 again to try some of these joints that I had that just driven past before, and I had like 6 scoops of ice cream and ate like 5 meals at a diner in one day. And I don't recommend doing that. You can always do the trip multiple times. Just a lot of these kind of homages to classic cars and car culture along the way, and that kind of juxtaposition, especially in Illinois, where there had already been a lot of development before Route 66, where you get kind of classic old style buildings next to funky mid-century buildings, which I really like. So we're going to leave Chicagoland, and the former Launching Pad restaurant in Wilmington is kind of the unofficial first stop outside of Chicagoland. Here's one of many fiberglass giants that we'll see along the way. There's no real significance they have for Route 66 history beyond just that kind of drive to market and get in people's faces and get them to stop. That's what these giants are all about. But at some point, they reached like critical mass, and it became a Route 66 thing. So then giants from elsewhere kind of have over time migrated to and around Route 66. Many of them actually moved from town to town or across town as they're bought and traded to kind of preserve them. You'll pass a couple really tiny towns. The Polka Dot Drive-In, a very popular spot. I was talking to the manager there when I was there, and he's talking about how in the summer, like packs of Europeans on group tours come in and just fill this restaurant that was completely empty when I was there. Can't say, again, this is kind of a recurring theme. I don't love all the food options. Just because I mentioned a restaurant doesn't mean I necessarily recommend you get a meal there. Hint, hint. And then lastly, as we're kind of emerging onto the main part of the road here, um, just note like the frontage roads and bypasses, you're actually driving right along I-55 for a huge part of this route. Some people are obsessed with like finding that original pavement. But I say if you're in a hurry, if you're trying to do this in a weekend, it's not, you can cheat and just get on the interstate sometimes without really missing that much. It's just when you approach towns that you want to kind of look at, make sure you're off of that interstate and going through the town. You'll see these different alignments. The blue line on this map of Dwight is the kind of original early 30s alignment, late 20s, early 30s. Then usually by the late 30s, early 40s, they build these bypasses that go around the town. And then finally in the 60s, they build the interstate that goes even further around the town. So you'll just have to decide as you plan your itinerary what's important to you. But I always like taking the oldest alignment whenever possible. But even I will jump on the interstate when I am falling behind schedule. So some sights in Dwight. Just wanted to call out the Crazy 80s Car Museum. I'm not really a car guy, but this one's really funny to me because it's all these like tiny little commuter cars from the late 70s and 80s, and the uh, owners are just really funny. It's a cool, quirky spot to stop, relatively new. I like to highlight this underpass in the town of Odell. At one point, the road was so busy that this tiny town needed to dig a tunnel so that people could get to church and to school. Now I could probably take a nap on that road you see there and not get hit by a car. So it's just amazing to see how much things have changed. Pontiac is kind of the Route 66 capital of the state. It's where our state association is headquartered. They have a fantastic museum in the old city hall. Highly, highly recommend you stop here. There's a lot of little museums on Route 66. This is probably my favorite, at least as far as Route 66 stuff goes. Really well done. And Acres Inn is a great kind of like local, kind of farm to table, old-timey burger joint. This is a step up from your typical diner, and I really like this place. They really highlight this artist Bob Waldmeyer, who lived on Route 66. He converted this bus. He built a second story on the bus and lived in it on the road. And his art is kind of all over Illinois. And elsewhere. He lived in Arizona in the winter, also in his bus. You'll notice these like talking, smiling cars down here. He was actually approached by Pixar when they were making that movie. They were going to even name the VW bus character off of after him, and he backed out at the last minute after kind of consulting with them because he was a vegan and he didn't want a Happy Meal toy made of his VW bus. So I think they changed the color and they changed the name from Waldmeyer to Fillmore. His art is in this great Route 66 companion. This is not a guidebook per se, but it's like a collection of writings by some really prominent authors and some academics that you're just supposed to read. Kind of, it's great for thumbing through as you're, taking a break from the road. So these are a lot of the sights you'll see as you cruise down 55, past some other great towns don't have time for. Bloomington Normal is worth a long stop. Their history museum in the old courthouse is fantastic. The building itself is beautiful. They're working on a big Route 66 like multi-level exhibit. They already have some stuff up, but definitely worth checking this place out. It really like they do a great job kind of connecting the Lincoln culture that I'm more interested in with the later Route 66 culture, and they have a great staff and great exhibits. And Bloomington itself just has wonderful architecture. I love the Art Deco, particularly. This church, Holy Trinity, right in downtown Bloomington, is just jaw-dropping. Hardly have I ever seen another kind of Art Deco church like this anywhere. You'll see this recurring motif of restored kind of 1920s service stations, many of them turned into little gift stores or museums that are operated seasonally. And the Constitution Trail is on the old Chicago and Alton Railroad right of way. You can walk and bike it. It's just a gorgeous, wonderful walk. Um, Steak and Shake was founded in Bloomington Normal by the Belts. These actors pictured here are portraying the Belts standing near their own grave, talking about how delicious their burgers are. I think Steak and Shake's gone downhill a little bit lately, but there are some great smash burgers in the Bloomington area at Pop-Up Chicken, Green Gables, and Bakery and Pickle. Really great town to get your second burger of the day in. And Epiphany Farms is a bit upscale, a little healthier farm to table restaurant. The Luca Grill also is about 90 years old. It's right on Route 66. It's a mainstay of Bloomington. It's got pizza and some pasta. I recommend the artist Pokey Lafarge. He's from Bloomington, lives in St. Louis, and plays like songs, music in the style of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So really kind of right along that Route 66 theme. Um, Funk's Grove is a little pioneer community that still taps maple syrup and sells it in that kind of greater Bloomington area. If you're lucky, you can even go there when they're tapping and get involved in that process. Atlanta is a tiny, tiny town that I like to highlight because they have the American Giants Museum where this gentleman has collected a ton of these fiberglass giants and restored them, and they're just all kind of hanging out around town and in his seasonal museum. Just be careful not to speed when you're leaving town, or this giant policeman will stop you. Lincoln is the only town named after President Lincoln before he was president. And it's got a really charming little courthouse square, a good bakery, a donut shop that's quite nice. Also, the largest covered wagon in the world with this giant Lincoln on it, right on Route 66. Some cool Lincoln history in this town. But really, if you like Lincoln, Springfield is the place to go. You can see the family home, the tomb, and the Presidential Museum. They just finished an exhibit where they had the Gettysburg Address on display, and I tweeted this picture of it, and a online posse of Confederate sympathizers started to attack me and cyberbully me. So it's a sort of danger you can get into if you start posting your travels online too much. If you're interested in Lincoln's time in Illinois, Herndon's Life of Lincoln is the recommended book written, compiled by his law partner after he died. Herndon scooted all around central Illinois and beyond and interviewed as many people as he could find who knew the original Lincoln, not the legend, but the man himself. And it's just a very endearing, interesting look at Abraham Lincoln, especially his time in Illinois. No shortage of Lincoln recommendations. There's, of course, famously like 15,000 books written about Lincoln. Many of them can be found at Prairie Archives in Springfield, this great bookstore. Here's a picture of their box storage system in the back. I just love this store. The Capitol is worth a quick tour. They're free, they're not very long, and it's just a gorgeous building that they're kind of constantly in the process of restoring. And if you like architecture, the Dana Thomas House, also a free tour of a beautiful prairie style Frank Lloyd Wright in Springfield. This is where the corn dog on a stick was invented at Cozy Dog. Um, it's a corn dog. I'm not going to say it's the best food you'll have on this trip, but it's a good snack. And it's just a really, really cool place. I'm not a big fan of going to restaurants purely for the atmosphere, but this place is an exception to the rule. It was actually run by that artist, Bob Wildmeyer's father, and he provided a ton of the art inside it. It's just a really fun retro spot to eat a hot dog. Springfield has a lot of regional cuisine that probably rightly has not transcended too far beyond its borders. Chili with two L's. It's just kind of a runny chili. I think the beans are added really late in the game. It's tasty. A horseshoe is also tasty, but you will have to lay down for about 6 hours and after you eat it. So you know, you might want to plan your itinerary accordingly. That's just meat and gravy and French fries on top of a open face sandwich. Made right. I got this picture from their website. This is them trying to make it look appealing. I just can't get behind loose meat sandwiches. This is a rare moment of negativity, Illinois negativity from me. But this is where that original drive-through window can be found. It's on Route 66. So the last leg of our journey, as we kind of speed towards St. Louis, it does get confusing again. There are two alignments that are pretty different. It's not just a matter of skipping around the outskirts of a town anymore. As you see, I'm toggling between these maps. It's just a different roadway. The old Illinois 4 was not really Route 66 for very long, but that was that old Pontiac Trail. It's my preferred of the two. It's just, I like old stuff and it's got older stuff on it. The other alignment really closely parallels I-55, so it's a little less scenic, but there's some really cool stops on that route. So you got to kind of just do both, in my opinion, sadly. Um, Auburn is just a cute town. It's where that long stretch of brick road is. And Verdon is an old mining town that had a very horrific, violent clash between striking workers and strike breakers and militarized police. And it was Mother Jones, the great labor organizer, who was really involved in that. And she said that when she died, she wanted to be buried next to the miners who gave their lives fighting for workers' rights in Verdun. And so that's where she lies. This is one of the most famed labor rights advocates in the 1800s, buried in this tiny town in central Illinois. She was not even, I don't think, from Illinois. She didn't live in Mount Olive. This is where she wanted to be laid to rest, and the miners erected this magnificent monument to her in their tiny town. Litchfield also just a cool old town with lots of old buildings. Very fun walking around Litchfield. They've got three kind of must-see Route 66 stops, a great museum. Believe it or not, it's so retro looking, but it's a newly built building. The gas station sign is old. And right across the street from it are two of the most beloved and famous little restaurants on the highway in Illinois. U-Belts in particular has just incredible pies. And as we kind of close in on St. Louis, Livingston has the Pink Elephant Antique Mall. They have another little like replica diner. It's not It's not actually authentic, but it's very cute. And Hamel has Wheezy's, which is like a roadside eatery that's I actually have not been here, but it's beloved. At this point in the journey, I've had like 8 hamburgers, and I don't need any more hamburger. Collinsville is on kind of a different alignment. There's another, it gets very confusing around St. Louis. There's something like 4 different ways Route 66 enters that city. So you can't really go wrong. You probably, if you're crossing the Mississippi River, you're on a bridge that at one point was part of Route 66. Collinsville boasts Cahokia Mounds and also the largest ketchup bottle in the world. Um, and this great book, Cahokia Jazz, it's like a noir detective novel, just came out. If you like geography and history, you got to read it. Any book that opens to like a cool map, obviously, is going to be right up our alley. But it's set in the 20s in a kind of fictional what if scenario where the ancient native metropolis of Cahokia kind of retained its Native American population. And it imagines how that would have affected U.S. history and like the formation of states and migration of people. And it's all told through this like gritty 20s detective story. So just a ton of fun. One of my all-time favorite books. East St. Louis, many of the cities right along the river are a little worse for wear now, disinvested, quite empty in many cases of people. It's kind of East St. Louis has this reputation of being dangerous, and I'm not telling you whether you should or shouldn't go anywhere you're not comfortable going, but I was kind of surprised walking around at night. I did have a tour guide with me, a local, so I wasn't, I don't think I was doing anything extremely stupid. But it was just like we just didn't see anyone. It was empty. But there's some great architecture, many of it abandoned. The Chain of Rocks Bridge, you can't drive across it anymore, but it's a pedestrian bridge across the Mississippi River, which is really cool. And it's a favorite approach to get into St. Louis for Route 66 heads. Um, and there is a modern bridge that you can drive your car across as well. And I promise I'm wrapping things up right now. I apologize. I'm going to just go just a couple minutes over really quickly, show you the highlights of St. Louis. 2 great cemeteries as you get in there, Bellefontaine and Calvary, where so many prominent people are buried. This is me saluting General William Tecumseh Sherman. William Clark, the explorer, is buried there. The Bush and Anheuser families have these great tombs. If you like cemeteries, that's worth a stop. Downtown is just full of fantastic architecture and sculpture. Really, really cool. Not a ton of like life happening there, like restaurants. It's a very like office building oriented downtown. But this park that goes through the middle of it, basically west from the arch, is just fantastic. And there's some great museums as well. Like this one that tells the story of Dred Scott. His case was decided at the old courthouse in St. Louis. I love to give a shout out to libraries, and St. Louis has one of the best. Look at these ceilings, it's just incredible. This is a great place to have your St. Louis meal. It's an old auto showroom just a few blocks off of Route 66 in Midtown. That's also where St. Louis University is, which is worth walking around. There's a couple places to explore there. The route takes you through Forest Park, where the World's Fair was, and the Central West End neighborhood, which boasts, I believe, the largest collection of mosaics in a single church. Just fantastic, fantastic place to check out. The Hill is an old Italian neighborhood. You want to get ooey gooey butter cake while you're there at Missouri Baking Company, and toasted ravioli is another specialty of this neighborhood. If you take another alignment through St. Louis, you'll go through the old French neighborhoods of Soulard and Lafayette Square. The pictures kind of speak for themselves, just absolutely gorgeous. Great farmers market in Soulard. And then the kind of mid-century neighborhood of St. Louis Hills is just full of beautiful little homes from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Really nice town to walk around. This is where Ted Drewes ice cream stand is. It's beloved in St. Louis, and it is more or less where we'll end our tour. I just want to shout out 3 points further west from St. Louis that are great for Route 66 heads. Another smash burger stand, a great museum in Kirkwood. And if you're sick of burgers and scrambled eggs, you can go to Balkan Treat Box, which is very different than the usual fare we've been eating on this trip. A bit more music for your playlist. Scott Joplin, who basically kind of invented ragtime, lived in St. Louis. The St. Louis Blues, the song is called the Jasmine's Hamlet because every musician who's anyone has recorded a cover of this great song, one of the great American songs. And of course, Chuck Berry kind of invented rock and roll in St. Louis. So that is it. Here's my daughter in a little mining outfit. And I appreciate your time and your patience. Happy to answer questions. Yeah, this was the world premiere of this talk. So I was, I guess, in retrospect, a few slides too long. So sorry I breezed through the end of it there a little bit, but happy to answer questions.
Thanks, John. It's Joe here at the office. I had to hop in. Natalie had a little technical issues, but looks like everything went okay. So thank you for finishing strong. Looks like we got one question here. Let's see. How did they do the foot race across country? Like how long did it take? How did they sleep, etc.?
Yeah, I don't think there were a ton of rules about where to sleep. There was some camping, some you could stay in people's houses. You just had to, you know, run or walk the entire time. And it took 84 days, I think, for the winner to finish. He was a Cherokee man from Oklahoma. There's a statue of him up in his hometown. And the stories from this Great American Foot Race are insane. People were getting sick, like going to the doctor while they were on this race. I mean, I just can't imagine what that would be like.
Awesome. Next question was, is there a good map of the route from Chicago to St. Louis?
A great question. And I wish I could say that it was simple. It's not. There is a site. It's called um, Driving Route 66. I'm trying to pull it up right now so I get it right. DrivingRoute66.com that has like overlays on Google Maps. You click on the state you're interested in, and then you can zoom in and see it in satellite view because it gets really confusing. I mean, in between towns or driving through small towns, very simple, but very confusing as you approach any city of any sort of size. And it's kind of fun, I think, to follow like the historical markers. They've put up these historic Route 66 signs and there's like arrows, turn here, turn up ahead. It's a little confusing. But I was complaining about it to one of these Route 66 museum people, just chatting, but saying like, sometimes the signs are great and then sometimes it's just like, where are the signs? Like, am I still on the road? And she told me that they're like stolen so frequently. The state is constantly going out, putting replacements out. So that's why, like, just this a couple weeks ago when I did it last, south of Springfield, I was just like, where am I? Why is there not a single sign? And it's because they were all stolen.
Yeah, I'd
But
imagine. It's
that
a
that
hot
mapping
commodity.
website is pretty good.
All right. Let's see. The next question we had, someone asked if they could get the slides or if this is recorded. Yes, it's recorded, so we will have it up for you guys to watch again. After that, we had someone ask, who were the primary marketers of the highways? Chambers of commerce, states, communities, or who was it?
Yeah, in the early days, definitely chambers of commerce and like statewide organizations. This person knows their stuff. That's exactly how it happened. They're called Route 66 associations, and even back in the 30s, they were kind of following the same game plan. The government's gotten way more involved now that it's a historic route, and they're stepping in, with signage and trying to destroy a bit less of the road than they had been destroying and preserve what's left of it. It's really cool. In fact, that Gemini Giant on one of the earlier slides in Wilmington, just south of Joliet, like this coalition of nonprofits and the Historical Society, and I think some private donors and government grants raised like, oh, I'm blanking on the amount, but maybe like 250, $300,000 to purchase that from its owner, who is kind of letting it decompose slash actively destroying it. So they like it's kind of remarkable the coalitions that are involved in saving what's left of this highway.
Nice. Next question we had was someone asked, was it the original route of Route 66 closer to the lake and not where it is right now?
Closer to Lake Michigan.
I
I
assume that's what they are
Yeah,
referring
I
to.
don't know. I mean, that's just the starting point. So, as far as I know, Jackson and Michigan Avenue have always has always been that intersection, but I'll have to look into that. There's been so many changes, especially early on. Early on, states were in such a hurry to get these roads operational that they looked around for a good enough road and said, okay, that's Route 66. And then they'd go on and building and improving other roadways and then redesignating that as the real route. So in the late 20s and early 30s, it changed so much. It's very confusing. I can't imagine being one of these completists and trying to figure out to that level of detail. It's maddening.
For sure. Um, let's see. I think that was all we had. Someone asked where can we watch it again? Just look on the GSC website. It should be under the events, and we have the travel logs listed there with the videos. Looks
So if
like
I
that's
could
all.
chime in
Yeah.
on that too, like if you know other people who might like this, I don't know if GSC like shares to non-members or whatever. But I also go on this library tour all summer long. I'll be giving this talk and some others. So go to my website, and if you know anyone who lives near one of these libraries, send them my way.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to send that to Natalie and I too, we could mention it in our newsletter.
Oh, perfect.
So yeah, that would be awesome. We're always looking for stuff like that to share with people, whether they're members or not, it's the whole community's welcome.
Sure. Awesome.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. And thank you, John, for doing this. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, everybody. Give me a shout on social media or email or whatever. I'd love to chat with fellow travelers.